Well, on the Real Housewives of Orange County this week, it was girl fights galore. But before tempers flared, Heather and Emily did a little retail therapy. And while the ladies are shopping, Heather asked Emily why she went so hard on Jen the night before at the dinner party. Emily says, listen, Jen shouldn't be rolling around in a Rolex if she owes people money. She should either hide it or sell it. And if she doesn't do either of those things, then Emily just thinks she's stupid. Then we're on the beach with Tamra and Jen, who is still reeling from everything that happened the night before, when Emily jumped down her very broke throat. But then she goes on to say, but Gina came over the other night and she was saying that she thinks that Emily has really changed ever since she's been hanging out with you, Tamra. Then we're at a different boutique, this time with Gina and Katie, who was still hungover from the night before. Gina asked Katie why she seemed quiet and standoffish the night before, and Katie said that she didn't want the night to become about paparazzi-gate and everything that had been happening with her and Heather. But the truth is, Katie's actually still really hurt by Gina, and she says that now she feels leery of their friendship. Gina tells Katie that Heather is definitely pissed at her, and then goes on to say that she doesn't have time for Heather's moments at this moment. And then at the next moment, Shannon walks in, and all the women say, "How are you?" And she goes, "Okay." John Jansen just served me with a $75,000 lawsuit. Shannon goes on to say that she's not sure if Alexis is behind this lawsuit, but she does think it's suspect, and she's also completely shook by all the derogatory things that Tamra's been saying about her. Back at Boutique 1, Heather still can't figure out why Gina moved the way Gina moved. Emily says maybe she's just going through a lot with this whole Travis situation. Heather gave that theory a huge eye roll. Heather is clearly feeling very pissed and betrayed, and she has approximately 1 million questions that she needs answered from Gina. Back on the beach, Jen tells Tamra that she goes hard at Shannon and then asks her where they go from here. Tamra says, I only go hard because I care. If I didn't care, I wouldn't go hard. But then Jen says, I've been on that receiving end of Tamra, and it is not a fun place to be, and that the harder Tamra goes at Shannon, the farther she'll push her away. Tamra says she's angry because she really thought that this would be a turning point for Shannon, a place where she could turn her life around and really start focusing on the right things. But that instead, she's still drinking, still making excuses, still blaming other people. And while Tamra is telling Jen that Shannon constantly is playing the victim, Shannon was back at that other boutique saying, don't call me a victim. Then it's girls' trip time. Tamra takes Jen, Alexis, and Katie up to her place in Big Bear, and during the entire drive up, Alexis wouldn't shut up. The whole way, it was Johnny J. Johnny J this and Johnny J that. Oh my God, you guys, I never knew that this existed because I never knew this existed. You guys, I've never experienced a love like my Johnny. Oh my God. I went to his Christian service. He went to my Christian service. I mean, you guys, a player's only a player until he meets the right person. Oh my God, I've never been this happy. It was Barf City, and I'm telling you, I would have jumped out of that car. And while those guys are heading to Big Bear, Gina takes Emily, Heather, and Shannon to La Quinta for a few days to hang out by the pool at Elizabeth Vargas's pad. And along the way, Gina apparently has second thoughts about this whole trip, and we learn that Shannon loves her some Jack in the Box tacos. And let's face it, who doesn't? But only twice a year. We take a tour of Tamra's beautiful cabin, but before it's finished, we see that the kitchen has sprung a leak. Then Gina and her gang arrive at Elizabeth Vargas's house. And if you don't remember Elizabeth, she was a season 5 housewife whose tagline was, I made my money the old-fashioned way. I married it. Then Tamra takes her gang sledding, where Alexis vies for and wins the title of most obnoxious ever. I mean, seriously, in the last couple years, I have not liked Shannon, but I'm telling you, at this point, I am disliking Alexis even more. Over in La Quinta, Heather is getting the grill together because she loves a wiener. Then Gina gives everyone a girls' trip sweatshirt. The housewives go wild and strip off on the spot. Then Heather tries to make a cocktail, but she can't seem to keep the shaker in her hand. And the drink spills all over that white floor that Gina cares very much about keeping clean. But Heather cleans it up, Cinderella style, while Emily steps in to finish making the drinks. But the drinks don't get finished because Emily can't keep that shaker in her hand either, and the rest of the cocktail goes all over the floor. Again. And at this point, Gina is pretty sure that this trip was a bad decision. But the only bad decision that I really see is that horrendous confessional look. What was that? That's some mind-blowing shit. The Jetsons meet Carmela Soprano. So bad. Back at Big Bear, Ding-a-ling Alexis comes down the stairs and doesn't even see the two women standing in front of her, and then says, I have to call Johnny J for a check-in. They FaceTime and she tells him that she's been waiting to hear his voice all day. And then she goes on to say, and I'm sure you're going to be so lonely in bed without me tonight. And we're back at Barf City. Back in La Quinta, Shannon tells Emily that Gina said that she's changed since hanging out with Tamra. Emily takes it all in, she's playing it cool, but inside she is stewing. And by the time those two get back to the kitchen, it's very clear to everyone that something is very wrong with Emily. They finally sit down and dine on some very delicious wieners, and after a very long, awkward silence, Gina says, "What's wrong?" Emily says, "I know that I was horrible to Jen at your dinner, that I was very aggressive to her, but you were saying horrible things about me even before that I'm mean and that I've changed and that you don't recognize who I am." And Gina says, "That's not true. I didn't say that." And then Heather pipes up and says, "You're the one that's changed." Gina says, "You think I've changed?" And then Heather sees a green light and goes right in. Heather says, "I'm your friend for years. Meanwhile, you don't know this girl from Adam. You meet this girl and then she gives you this bullshit information about me." Heather says, "Look, it affected my life." Heather went on to say that Paparazzi-gate affected her children and that she would expect Gina to be more sensitive given everything she went through when Shannon made those CPS comments. Now Gina's fired up and says to Heather, "I'm never allowed to make a mistake with you." And Heather says, "That's not true." Heather says there's a big difference between making a mistake in the moment and then letting that mistake linger. Gina says, "I didn't let the mistake linger. I called her back in less than 24 hours. Gina says, "I called her back the next day." And Heather says, "No, that's not what you told me. You told me you called her back in 10 minutes. And then they cut back to a clip where Gina said just that. Meanwhile, Katie herself said that the call actually happened weeks later. While over at Tamra's table, they're still talking about Paparazzi-gate, and Tamra tells Katie that she got set up. Meanwhile, Heather asks Gina, "So who's lying, you or Katie?" And Gina says, "Have I ever lied to you?" And Heather says, "I don't know. How would I know?" Gina says, "I called that girl up and told her not to do this. I don't care what Katie says. You're going to believe her over me?" And Heather says, "You believed her over me." And Gina's face fell to the floor. And Heather says, "I feel very betrayed by you. And I'm really having a hard time." Meanwhile, her eyes are filling with tears. She tells Gina that she's going to forgive her and try to move past this, but that it's not going to be easy for her. Then back in Big Bear, the girls dress like bears, and Tamra shows Jen how she can make some real money by dipping her toes in a pie for a price. Jen puts her toes in that pie, and then she turns her toes to Tamra, who sucks them dry, eyes closed and all. Then Alexis covers her eyes like she's a little kid. Tamra tells her not to be a prude, and Jen says, "Yeah, you have sex 4 times a day." Then Katie says, "Yeah, it's a good thing you're here to give that vag a break." And Tamra brings up something Shannon said about John's member. And Alexis said, "Don't say the S word." Jen asks Alexis when she's going to get off this hell path. And Alexis says, "I'll get off this hell path when she stops lying about my Johnny." She says John is the most wonderful man she knows and that Shannon keeps ruining his reputation all over town. Jen asks if she has a way to stop her, and Alexis says, "Do I need to pull out the videos?" Tamra says John has video of Shannon from the night of the DUI, and Alexis says, "And it's 10 times worse than anything you could imagine."